Okay, hi Mariko, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing fine, thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So, you've written a book that is a rewrite of Anne of Green Gables.
Yes, Anne of Green Gables.
Okay, now that's an old book that I don't remember anything about, but I
It's a
remember the
very old
title.
book, actually. It's an incredibly old book.
How old is the book?
1908.
Oh, so over 100 years old. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Give us a real quick overview of the original story and then tell us why you decided to rewrite it.
The original Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery was about an orphan named Anne Shirley, who is adopted by this brother and sister who take her in. Originally, they think that they're getting a boy, and then Anne shows up and she's very much a girl. And it's about her kind of moving to this small town of Avonlea and kind of being a bit of a fish out of water, but then eventually she comes to be sort of the cherished center of this very picturesque small town in Prince Edward Island.
Okay, the book was Canadian.
It is Canadian. It is like maybe one of the most prized Canadian classics.
So, why did you decide to rewrite it then?
Well, I decided to rewrite it because Melissa de la Cruz had this imprint with Disney, and she asked me to rewrite it, or she asked me. I think the idea was to take the original story and to do something that was inspired by that. So to take the story of an outsider who is sort of this, daydreaming artist, effusive character who moves to a small town and put a bit of a modern twist on it, which I don't necessarily, I think that there's room for all, especially in YA, there's room for every kind of book. And as a big fan of the original, I thought it was a really interesting challenge to do something that really wasn't about rewriting the original, but just taking that inspiration, taking that book that I loved a lot as a kid, and making something that maybe modern readers could relate to a little better.
Do you follow the story, the original story?
No, I really don't. The sort of general makeup of the story and the main character of Anne Shirley is very much inspired by the original. And of the original book was very much somebody who kind of like relentlessly marches, to her to her inner beat and refuses to kind of change, or does her best to sort of stay as much as who she is in the face of a lot of pretty stringent opposition. And so I wanted to take that kind of character and put her in a modern setting.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about you? Have you always been a writer?
I have. I started writing when I was in high school. I was, one of the creative writing kids when I was in high school. I published my first book in my 20s. And yeah, at this point, I would say, I'm a professional writer. That's what I do for a living. And I've been working in comics. I've worked in theater. I've worked in television. Yeah, it's like my favorite thing. And so I'm very lucky to get to do it.
Well, it's great that you can do it for a living because a lot of writers
Yes.
have to do something else to support
Yeah,
themselves,
I did
right?
something else too for a very long time. I have done other things as well, but I think writing has been the most consistent part of my life.
Also, on your bio, it says that you've got a couple of other books. How many have you published altogether?
I've kind of lost count. I have written three major graphic novels. I think I have three or four prose books under my belt at this point. I have two collections of essays. And as somebody who's written for DC Comics and Marvel for many years, I have multiple collections of, superhero stories as well.
Okay, tell us a little about that. That sounds interesting.
When I started writing graphic novels, I wrote graphic novels to write very personal stories. And the first graphic novel I wrote was Skim, which I did with my cousin Jillian Tamaki. And I was surprised that from that came offers to work in the DC Comics world. But I wrote Lara Croft Tomb Raider, I wrote Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I've kind of worked my way up to most recently, I wrote Batman for DC Comics.
I'm curious. I'm curious about the process, though. So you would write the story, and then they would have somebody illustrate it.
Yeah, really, comics are a co-creation. There's a writer and an illustrator, and in the case of DC Comics, there's letterers and inkers. and pencilers and cover artists and like a lot of people who work. I mean, it's sort of closer to film in that way, and that, you know, it's really you can't really say, yes, there may be a writer who originates the story, but the actual end product is the combination of a lot of people's work.
Has any of this been turned into an actual film? Any of your work?
Yeah, this one summer, which was my second graphic novel with Jillian Tamaki, is a French film called, I think it's called C'était là, which is the French translation. So yes, it has been turned into a film.
Tell us a little bit about that one. Give us a quick synopsis of that story.
Oh, this one summer is the story of two girls who every summer they go to this cottage that's kind of up in sort of like up north, as they would say. And it's kind of like a Fox and the Hound story in that it's about what it is to sort of be on that sort of edge of adulthood when you're a little kid. Like I always say, little kids are sort of anthropologists of adulthood. So it's about these two girls who go to the cottage and they're kind of studying the adults around them and sort of trying out the sort of different elements of adulthood that they see around them, which includes having a crush on one of the local boys.
Let me flip back to your book. It's called Anne of Greenville instead of Anne of Green Gables, right? Let me hit one of your talking points here. It says, what was it about the novel that was no longer relevant to your generation? Do you think that the book written in 1908 just doesn't really, it's irrelevant to kids today?
I don't know if I would call a book irrelevant, especially a book that I love. I think that the surprising thing about Anne of Green Gables is that I think you can still read it today, and I think people still love it today. And it was written, you know, more than a century ago, which is pretty astonishing. I did think, you know, like a couple of the small things were, for example, I don't know kids today know what it means to be like super excited to have ice cream for the first time, which is like one of the parts of the book. And also, Anne in the original book is a big fan of poetry and recites, for example, The Lady of Shalott, which I don't know if kids still do that. Maybe, you know, maybe there's places where they do. But my sort of take on that in sort of a modern context was the Anne of my book is a huge fan of disco. So she's obsessed with all things disco and disco music. And my sort of take on that was that for me, I wasn't necessarily a big poetry person when I was a kid, but I was a huge music fan. And so almost every age of my life coincides with an album of some sort or a genre of music that I treated like poetry, like I, you know, memorized lyrics and obsessed over those things. So I thought that would be sort of a modern take on The Lady of Shalott.
Who is Melissa de la Cruz?
Melissa de la Cruz is an incredibly talented writer who has written many, many, many books. And she is the curator of this imprint that she's doing with Disney. So she's amassed a bunch of amazing writers to do sort of, I think most of them are kind of classic. Some of them, or at least my book, is a take on a classic. But she's kind of put together this incredible imprint of writers writing for Disney.
Okay, because it says that this is the first novel from the Melissa de la Cruz studio.
Yes, I am the first novel. I'm the oldest sister of the imprint.
Okay, I've never heard the term studio used for, is she a publisher?
I mean, she's working with Disney. I don't know if she's a publisher per se. I'm not privy to those details, but yeah, I've never heard it called a studio either, but I think it sounds kind of cool.
Well, it does, but it just made me curious to what she actually is doing.
Yeah, I just know my part of it. My part of it is making this book for her. So you should ask her. You should have her on your show because she's incredible. She's written amazing books.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure that we haven't had her on the show, but after,
500 shows. It's possible
possible she was in there someplace. But I remember the name. I just didn't remember the connection and how that all worked with studio. Because
correct.
Is she exclusive to doing graphic novels?
No, none of these are graphic novels that I know of. Or they're not graphic novels so far. My novel is a prose novel. So yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible she'll do a graphic novel at some point.
Okay, well, maybe I'll have to look that up and re-educate myself on exactly what she's doing. Okay. So this book, Anne of Greenville, it is a young adult novel?
It is. Technically, books that are about teenagers are that is sort of one of the key requirements of it being young adult. So yes, it is young adult, and I think that the readership for this will probably be will be young adult, like younger adults.
Okay. Is the book out now?
It is. Yes, it just came out.
It just came out. Okay. Well, I think on that we can wind this down. Thanks so much. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
I don't have a website, but I am my name, which is Mariko Tamaki, on all social media. Most of my social media is like baked goods and hiking and books. So if you like those things, you can follow me on Instagram and on Twitter.
Okay. Where's the book available?
The book is available at all local comic book stores, which is where I would, you know, suggest people buy it if you can. Because the best thing about a local comic book store, I think, is the people who work there love local bookstores. And your local library would also probably have it, so you can ask for it there.
Okay. Would it be available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble and
It will also be available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, where I also do periodically buy books. So yes, it's there too.
Okay. All right, great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you, and best of luck with all of your work.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.